how we live with that understanding reflects like what is at your core of what you believe. Because I've mentioned this many times, and I will continue forever mentioning it, but the more we read this, the more we read the Bible from beginning to end, it makes more sense, and God is able to speak to our lives more and more. The more we know the text of this word, the more God is able to bring it to our minds and use it during our day in every circumstance, in every moment of our lives. He brings these scriptures to our minds to help us see, God, you are at the center of everything, and to keep our focus where it should be, which is on Him, not on this text. We live experiencing God, but we can't pause every second of the day, pull out our Bible, and read the Word. It has to be in our minds so that it can come through our hearts. And there's an interesting thing there, because we'll see today as we read this passage, two men who are seemingly from similar camps, right? Basically the people who were the religious leaders of the day and were against Jesus. That's in general this camp. But they respond to Jesus and all that He is and all that He teaches, taught in two very different ways. And one, he lost focus. He lost, I'm sure it's because of his upbringing and his teaching and everything that he was taught for whatever reason. But one guy approaches Jesus very differently than the other. And we'll start with verse 18 to 27. And so in chapter 12 of Mark, verses 18 to 27, it starts with the Sadducees. And Sadducees came to him, who say that there is no resurrection. And they asked him a question, saying, Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife, but leaves no children, the man must take the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. There were 7 brothers. The first took a wife, and when he died, left no offspring. The second took her and died, leaving no offspring. And the third likewise, and the 7 left no offspring. Last of all, the woman also died. In the resurrection, when they rise again, whose wife will she be? For the 7 had her as wife. Now remember at the beginning, actually, these guys don't even believe in the resurrection, but they're speaking to Jesus because Jesus does. And so like, this doesn't make any sense. Whose wife will she be in the resurrection? Because they don't believe in that. So I'll pause there just to clarify what I said before. You have the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the Herodians are also mentioned, and then the Scribes. And you have all these sort of camps of religious leaders, but they're not all actually one happy family. They're religious leaders, but they don't all share the exact same understandings. The Sadducees, for example, don't believe in the resurrection, as it said. So Jesus responded, Is this not the reason you are wrong? Because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. For when they rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And they don't really believe in that. And as for the dead being raised, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the passage about the bush, how God spoke to him, saying, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not God of the dead, but of the living. You are quite wrong. And so he actually doesn't really even much address that question that they asked of like, whose wife? Because it's altogether wrong. Their understanding of, as Jesus even said, of scripture and of the power of God. Because not only do they read the same scriptures that everybody reads and they didn't understand it correctly, but they don't understand the power of God either, because they don't believe in the resurrection. And yet here he points to how God said, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who were dead at that time. But because of the resurrection, because God will bring them back, he says God is not a God of the dead, but of the living. And in the end, the resurrection happens for everybody, and we are all together in the new heaven and new earth. But there's the key, is they're saying, okay, so then in this resurrection that you say will happen, whose wife will she be to these 7 guys? And he kind of blows that all away, because he says, when we raise from the dead, we're not going to marry. And I know that I've actually had talks with friends and people about this, because I know that sounds sad, because in a way, Ayla and I, for example, are married here. But when we rise, when in the resurrection, when everything is done and God makes a new heaven and new earth and we are all in paradise with God, I'm not going to go and find you and say, you're my wife, let's go, and we're all brothers and sisters all together. And we have a special connection, but it's not the same as, for example, this guy in this theoretical scenario where she had 7 husbands, and now in heaven, in paradise, like, who? It's not like that. That's for a different sermon if you want to go more into that. But the idea is, we are the bride of Christ. I am so much more in awe of Jesus. You are what it's all about. Then, well, forget about Jesus. I want to be with my wife. That's the picture. God is life. Everything about this world is about God. Everything. And Paul, this wasn't in my notes, but I just remembered it. Paul even spoke to that. He said, and I remember being confused by this, because I'm like, marriage is a good thing, right? But Paul said, I wish that all of you were like me and not married, because when you become married, now your attention is divided, because you want to please God, but also you want to please your spouse. And that's a good godly thing. If you have a spouse, God himself even says, wife first, or husband first, right? Under God. And then everything else. So pleasing your spouse, keeping that marriage relationship strong, is an image of how to glorify God, because through having a good, godly, healthy marriage, we show the gospel to others, because God is the one who makes our marriage strong. That said, they were all together wrong. They were very confused. And the danger in confusing what is in here, it was in here. The information that they were saying, it's in here, but they didn't understand it right. For example, the Mormon religion actually follows this same kind of way. So, for one, and I actually had a conversation about this, which I've had many times before, where people say all religions are the same. Basically, they all lead to the same place. They don't. For example, what Jesus just said here, that there is no husband and wife in heaven. We're all as angels, which means what I already said. Mormons say we are Christians, we're just like you, but they're not. Their beliefs are definitely different. It's just on the surface it seems the same. But for example, they believe that when you die, the husband becomes essentially kind of a god over his own planet, and then women live on that planet as his wives. So the guy becomes sort of a god, and then women inhabit the planet as his wives. That's not in here. We don't believe that. We believe when you die, it's all about Jesus. It's all about Jesus. We cannot confuse these things. We need to know what we believe. And so when we know what we believe and why we believe it and how, not only are we able to help ourselves and strengthen our own beliefs, but then we can help others. Non-Christians, we're able to describe the gospel to them and reason with them. And also, like me, for example, when I was growing up in church, I didn't accept Christ until I was 19. But ever since I was probably about 12 or 13, I prayed, and everybody just kind of assumed or believed I was a Christian, but I wasn't. And the key here is Paul, many times he says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. In other places, it talks about iron sharpening iron. There's this idea of we're not supposed to take it for granted that you're a Christian, so I'm just going to leave you alone. And say, no, we rub against each other. We make sure we are Christian and our brothers and sisters around us, which means we need to know this. And with non-Christians, Paul in 2 Corinthians 10:5, he said, "We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God." So that's this idea that, and I love Aila's church that she was going to in Brazil for this, because their church kind of treats every member of the church in this way of, if you're part of this church, that means your job, if you want to think of it that way, is to read the Bible. And if you're reading the Bible, you need to know and understand what you're reading. So reading the Bible is normal, and then you give quizzes to check, like, okay, here's some questions. Do you know the answers? And even in the church, they have kind of a church version of seminary, which is, if you want to know even more, we will train you on all these things about the Bible. Because Paul was not here in 2 Corinthians talking to theologians and pastors and the elite Christian. There is no elite Christian. He was talking to the church in Corinth. And if you remember the story in Corinth, that church was messed up. They had a lot of problems. And he was speaking to them, trying to raise that bar to say, this is how you need to be. Remember, Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And here, we destroy arguments. We reason against every lofty opinion people would raise against Christianity. We stand our ground and defend Christianity. We know what's in the Bible. We know what we believe, and we defend it in love and respect and with grace. But we defend it. Some of the common Bible misquotes, I went and looked up some of them, and I found them in here. I've heard some of these, and most likely some of y'all have heard them before as well. This one, God will never give you more than you can handle. I'm pretending like I'm hearing you, but I'm listening to all of you who raise your hands and say, yes, I've heard that. Because I've heard it too, actually many times. And oftentimes we said it in moments when, like, a friend of ours was going through a really hard time. And as a way to, like, comfort them, we would say, God will never give you more than you can handle. You can handle this. Unfortunately, that's not in the Bible. It's a misquote. It's not in there. Many moments where we are given more than we can handle. And the whole point of that is, God, I can't handle this. I need you. There is a powerful moment in life, moments, hopefully plural, where you reach that state of brokenness when you say, God, I can't handle this. I need you. And we come to God broken, and he picks us up, and he heals us, and he helps us, and he gives us strength to get through what we couldn't get through on our own. On purpose, God gives us actually more than we can handle, so that we remember God is life. All of life is meant to point us to God, to remind us, God, we need you. Because every moment in the Bible, when Israel or when anyone got in trouble, it's because they forgot, I need you, God, every second of every day. Prosperity is dangerous because it makes us forget that very real fact. Money is not evil, but the danger in money and having a lot of it is oftentimes it takes away all of our worries and stresses and things that we have to do, and it replaces God, because I no longer need God because money solves all my problems. And that's when we get into trouble, because now I'm under this delusion that, God, I finally made it. I don't need you anymore. It's okay. Which brings me to the second misquote from the Bible. Money is the root of all evil. Have you ever heard that one? I know almost everybody has heard that in some way. That's not accurate. Money is not the root of all evil. It's not evil to have money. There's a gospel, whether it's prosperity gospel or poverty gospel, but it's all about this thing of money. Poverty gospel is, if you want to be like Christ and be holy, you have to be poor, because money is the root of all evil, and it leads to, it does. What's in the Bible is the love of money is a root of all means. Think of it like a highway. The more money you have, the bigger the highway to lead you off into sin. But having money itself is not a sin. It is the love of money. Remember, you can't have two masters. You can't love God and love money. So all of these things, it's about the more money you have, unfortunately, the more you need to be on guard because you're in danger of losing sight of that precious thing that is the need for God and the desperation for God to be in your life in every second of it. But because of our natural, sinful human desire to want to be independent, which is good, we're supposed to. When we turn 18, for example, in the States, you're now independent and you need to stop relying on your parents, right? You need to be your own person and get a job. But don't treat God the same way as you do your parents of like, okay, I'm independent. I don't need you anymore. That rule does not apply to our relationship with God because you move from being a baby to a child to an adolescent to now you're an adult. With God, this doesn't change. We are always human and we are always sinful and we are always prone to be selfish and all the other things that draw us away from God. And money makes that even easier. But money is not sinful. Another one, this too shall pass. This one isn't terrible, but Ecclesiastes, which is a rather depressing book for people who don't know. But basically, the whole book of Ecclesiastes is really long, and all it says over and over again is life is fleeting and meaningless, and the passions of life will dissolve away, and it all amounts to nothing. Everything is vain. Who essentially was depressed at that time because man ever, and he could have anything and everything he wanted, and at the end of his life, he realized it all amounts to nothing. And the only thing that really matters in life is God and what is it? The other believers that are in the world and the work that God has given you to do while you're here on earth. Everything else is fleeting. And I remember that one time because the first time I ever sat in one of the brand new Corvettes when they made them and they were amazing, and I got inside and I shut the door and I was like, but like that was it. There wasn't any like fireworks or anything amazing. And I was like, man, I was really expecting this to be like some huge explosion of excitement because I'm sitting in this amazing car. That's kind of like what Solomon was saying in this book is the greatest, sweetest pleasure that the world could possibly give goes away. That doesn't mean don't take joy in life, but this was taken from the Bible, but if you're going through a hard time in life, hold on because this too will pass, which is itself true, but it's not in the Bible. Last one, to thine own self be true. It's beautiful, but it's from Shakespeare. It's not from God. And it's this idea of to thine own self be true. Whatever is true for you, do that. As long as you're true to yourself, you're good. And the problem with that is you might have heard other people say it, but people often end up paraphrasing or can't judge me. Only God can judge me. And God knows my heart. And he knows that I'm sincere and I'm doing what I believe is good. The danger in that is if what you're doing and you believe in your heart is good, but it's wrong in here, this wins. God may know your heart, but if what you're doing is wrong, it's wrong. Even good intentions, it doesn't make it good. The end does not justify the means. So these are all, it's not bad stuff. It's just misquoting the Bible, misusing it. Unfortunately, there are things that people say that do lead people astray and do get into trouble. One of those is Jesus never claimed to be God. That's not true. John 5:18 is one example. And for those of you who are like, he did, look up the verse. I'm not going to hand feed it to you because I want you to look in the Bible and underline it. This is one of many moments where God said, I am God. The problem is, he didn't actually use those three words, I am God. As sometimes he actually did use I am, which if you study your Bible, that means I am God. I am. It's I am. But the thing you'll find is Jesus very often would say things that are clear and crystal clear. But he doesn't say, I am God. He says it in this other way that, for example, people tried to stone Jesus, and he said, why are you stoning me for doing this good work? And they would say, we're not stoning you for healing a guy. We're stoning you because you claimed to be God. But if you read, Jesus never said, I am God. But the people understood we need to think what we're reading and understand it and read this over and over and over again. The second one, Jesus never spoke about homosexuality. That's not the focus of this sermon, but I want to be clear, he did. Jesus just didn't use that specific, explicit word. And a lot of times, again, because of our human nature and our tenacity to want to find loopholes or justify ourselves or whatever, we oftentimes say, well, Jesus didn't use this word. He did. But what he did was he pointed back to the Old Testament where Jesus stood on top of and said, I affirm, I stand behind everything the Old Testament says, but I'm also fulfilling. And that's what he said. I am fulfilling, I am bringing to completion what the Old Testament lacked. He didn't get rid of the laws or the rules in the Old Testament. He supported and affirmed and reaffirmed them. And so that one in Matthew 19, 4 through 6, if you want to look that one up, Jesus basically points back to Genesis, which is when God created everything, created creation, he created mankind, male and female. In the image of God, he created them. And the man shall leave his father and mother and join with his wife, and the two shall become one. This is what Jesus is pointing to when he says this is God's ordained order, manner of creation. This is how God made creation to be. Any twisting or diluting of God's order in creation is not how God created it. That's how he made it to be. The last one, Jesus never talked about hell. That one's also not true, but you'll hear people say it. Also, I've heard people say that in the Bible, it never says that we go. They say in Scripture, it says that hell was created for Satan and his angels, but not for us. That's not true. In that text where it says for Satan and his angels, just before that, it's God saying, you are going to go to hell, which was created for Satan and his angels. Mm-hmm. So all you have to do is read before it, because what that means is hell was not originally created